Welcome to the Educating Users to Adopt Data Protection Practices module of the Symantec Data Loss Prevention 15.5 Administration course. Even the best data loss prevention systems cannot eliminate all risks to an organization's confidential information. One area in particular presents a unique challenge to data loss prevention programs, that is, human behavior. You can author as many policies as you like to prevent sensitive data from leaving your infrastructure's boundaries or being misused within your organization, but simply blocking data does not directly address the primary source of risk, that is, the thought processes and behavioral patterns of the users who put the data at risk to begin with. Most employees want to be an asset to their organization rather than a potential liability. Incidents of data misuse often come down to a lack of awareness about proper data security principles and practices, and a lack of familiarity with the ever-evolving techniques of individuals and groups who want to steal confidential information. In this lesson, we will be offering some suggestions about designing effective data loss prevention awareness training programs for your organization, and we'll discuss how to use Symantec DLP's notification capabilities to educate users in real time about acceptable data usage practices. In the context of the data loss risk reduction implementation model described in the data loss prevention landscape lesson, these activities will occur during the notification phase. To address this business objective, we will cover the following topics: implementing corporate training on data protection policies and providing notifications of user policy violations. Implementing corporate training on data protection policies. In this topic, we'll discuss some of the important factors involved in providing successful data security awareness training within an organization. Educating users on data protection policies and safe handling of sensitive information can greatly enhance an organization's data protection efforts and reduce the load on data loss prevention infrastructure. Although there is limited public data available to irrefutably prove the effectiveness and value of data security awareness education programs, there is abundant anecdotal evidence from organizations who commit the necessary time, effort, and resources to provide solid data security awareness training for their users. For instance, one organization recently reported that it ran phishing exercises before and after data security awareness training. In the exercise that was run before the training, 35% of the workforce fell for a relatively simple phishing attack. In the post-training exercise, the workforce was 75% better at identifying the phishing attack, even though it was much more difficult. In this topic, we will offer some suggestions and best practices for designing data security awareness training that will have a long-term measurable impact on improving user skills related to handling sensitive data. First, strengthening user commitment to data protection. Users play a critical role in protecting an organization's confidential data. In the publication Best Practices for Implementing a Security Awareness Program, the PCI Security Standards Console stressed the importance of educating users about this role. Quote, "One of the biggest risks to an organization's information security is often not a weakness in the technology control environment. Rather, it is the action or inaction by employees and other personnel that can lead to security incidents. It is therefore vital that organizations have a security awareness program in place to ensure employees are aware of the importance of protecting sensitive information, what they should do to handle information securely, and the risks of mishandling information. Employees' understanding of the organizational and personal consequences of mishandling sensitive information is crucial to an organization's success. Helping users clearly understand the impact that each individual's data handling practices can have on the health of their organization and strengthening their commitment to protect confidential data is an important part of any data loss prevention program." In preparation for designing data security awareness training for your users, it is useful to review the standards and best practices compilations mentioned in the data loss prevention landscape lesson of this course, those that are applicable to your industry or sector. This will help you focus your priorities on the data security topics that your users need to know for their jobs. Some of the publications that organizations are using to manage privacy and information protection challenges include the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, and the International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC, publications, such as the ISO IEC 27002 Information Technology Security Techniques Code of Practice for Information Security Controls. This publication provides guidelines related to information security standards and information security management practices, including the selection, implementation, and management of controls that take into consideration the organization's information security risk environment. Also, the ISO IEC 29100 Information Technology Security Techniques Privacy Framework. This publication provides a privacy framework that specifies a common privacy technology and defines the actors and their roles in processing personally identifiable information, or PII. It also describes privacy safeguarding considerations and provides references to known privacy principles for information technology. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, also has several special publications. The Security and Privacy Controls for Federal Information Systems and Organizations publication provides a catalog of security and privacy controls for federal information systems and organizations, as well as a process for selecting controls to protect operations, assets, individuals of organizations, and the nation from threats such as hostile cyber attacks, natural disasters, structural failures, and human errors. The Guide to Protecting the Confidentiality of Personally Identifiable Information discusses protecting the confidentiality of PII in information systems. It provides practical, context-based guidance for identifying PII and determining the appropriate level of protection for each PII instance. It also suggests safeguards for protecting PII and provides recommendations for developing response plans for incidents involving PII. Lastly, an introductory resource guide for implementing the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, security rule publication summarizes the HIPAA security standards and guidelines and explains some of the structure and organization of the security rule. It also discusses information security terms used in the HIPAA security rule and explains the meaning of the security standards set out in HIPAA. To illustrate how an organization might approach the review process in preparation for establishing data protection guidelines for their users, let's take the NIST Special Publication 800-122, Guide to Protecting the Confidentiality of Personally Identifiable Information, as an example. An organization that works in the healthcare industry would find Section 4.1.2 of this document of interest in identifying areas where their users need to be educated. This section states, depending on the roles and functions involving PII, important topics to address may include the definition of PII, applicable privacy laws, regulations, and policies, restrictions on data collection, storage, and use of PII, roles and responsibilities for using and protecting PII, appropriate disposal of PII, sanctions for misuse of PII, recognition of a security or privacy incident involving PII, retention schedules for PII, and roles and responsibilities in responding to PII-related incidents and reporting. Taking these suggestions into account, the organization might decide it needs to train its users to do any of the following. 1. Recognize the specific types of PII they will encounter as they work with employee and patient records. 2. Identify the parties with whom they are or are not allowed to share PII. 3. Knowing where and how to store records and backups. 4. Knowing how to safely dispose of records that are no longer needed. And 5. Understanding the consequences of violating data security policies. After you have reviewed both general data protection frameworks as well as standards specific to your industry and have determined what information is pertinent for the way your organization does business, you can begin to formulate more precise guidelines that you will communicate to your users in data security awareness training. Just as with the drafting of data loss prevention policies, it is important to obtain input and approval from executive and department stakeholders when drafting content for data security awareness training programs. At this stage, leadership should have already assessed the organization's risk profile and achieved a consensus on what data the organization needs to protect, where the data resides, and how the data will be protected, so the majority of the work for drafting data protection guidelines should already have been done. The guidelines review process with stakeholders is one of the finishing touches, albeit a critical one. In effect, it is the process of achieving a consensus on how to communicate leadership decisions regarding data loss prevention policies to users across the organization. As far as possible, craft data protection awareness guidelines to be generic enough so that they are applicable to the organization as a whole. This can be a challenge in large organizations, where the data protection needs of one department might differ considerably from another department's needs. In such cases, consider drafting a global set of guidelines that apply to all users in the organization, and then draft more specific, focused guidelines that apply to departments with needs not addressed in the global guidelines. Additionally, keep in mind that both data loss prevention policies and data security awareness guidelines should balance the requirements of doing business with the need to protect confidential information. Policies and guidelines that are highly restrictive or inflexible might reduce the risk of data loss, but can also bring business processes to a standstill. Provide a straightforward way for users to make their case as to why an action should be allowed, and develop an approval process that enables departmental management and executive officers to grant individual users the permission to perform necessary actions that are otherwise off limits to the overall organization. To cite a specific example from the web-based publication CSO Online, quote, suppose there is debate about whether users should have access to removable media, such as USB storage devices. A security professional may believe that such access should never be required, while a technology executive may believe that technology operations departments responsible for data manipulation must have the ability to move data around on any type of media. At the policy level, the consensus-driven approach would provide a general statement that, quote, all access to removable media devices is approved via a process supported by an accountable executive. The details of the approval processes used by the technology executive can be further negotiated as discussions continue. The general policy statement still prohibits anyone without an accountable executive supporting an approval process from using removable media devices. Effectively training users about the threats to an organization's confidential data and the user's responsibilities related to safeguarding this data can be a difficult challenge. It is one thing to recite a collection of facts and figures for users to memorize, but it is quite another to persuade individuals to change their thinking and behavior so that sound data security practices become second nature. Therefore, it is essential that you base your data security awareness program on tightly focused objectives and provide information and exercises that are highly pertinent to your users' daily routines. In a Security Week article published in 2015 entitled Getting Employee Security Awareness Training Right, Gartner security education analyst Andrew Walls states, quote, the number one problem in the typical security awareness program is a lack of well-defined, measurable objectives for the program. Well-defined objectives enable the design, development, acquisition of effective security education and training that produces measurable improvements in security. Close quote. Walls identifies 4 general types of objectives in security awareness programs: defining behavioral baselines in order to justify disciplinary actions when an employee violates policy, achieving regulatory compliance, establishing, diminishing, or maintaining certain behaviors, and educating users about security and risk management. In addition to a lack of precise objectives, Walls identifies 2 other areas where security awareness programs often fail: not understanding the intended audience and emphasizing data security awareness concepts that are not based on an accurate risk assessment. Consequently, an organization is more likely to see progress in improving employees' data usage habits when data security awareness training is built around 1. Well-defined measurable objectives, 2. A sound understanding of the types of data-related tasks that users perform in the course of their job duties and how the users interact with sensitive data, and 3rd, a realistic assessment of the data security threats users are likely to encounter and the level of risk this contact poses to the organization. Basing data security awareness training on these criteria increases the likelihood that users will retain what they have learned, because the content is tightly focused and it is directly applicable to their day-to-day job responsibilities. In summary, educating users to clearly understand the impact their data handling practices can have on the health of their organization and strengthening their commitment to protect confidential data is a crucial part of any data loss prevention program. Reviewing data security standards and best practices documents, such as those published by ISO and IEC and NIST, can help organizations focus their priorities on the topics that their users need to know for their jobs. Just as with drafting data loss prevention policies, it is important to obtain input and approval from executive and department stakeholders when drafting content for data security awareness training programs. As far as possible, craft data protection awareness guidelines to be generic enough that they are applicable to the organization as a whole, and then, if needed, draft more specific focused guidelines that apply to groups whose needs are not addressed in the global guidelines. It is essential to base data security awareness programs on tightly focused objectives and provide information and exercises that are highly pertinent to users' daily routines. This increases the likelihood that users will retain and apply what they have learned. Providing notifications of user policy violations. In this topic, we'll discuss the user notification options available in Symantec DLP and how to configure the product to send email notifications to users when they violate DLP policies. In addition to running formal training classes to educate users about data security, there is another valuable method organizations can leverage to educate users on the job: Symantec DLP notifications. When a user handles confidential data in a manner that violates security policy, Symantec DLP can alert the user of the infraction immediately, with a number of options: an on-screen pop-up, an email message, a marker file that replaces quarantined confidential files, and tags that educate the user about the incident and what to do next. Effective use of notifications can measurably reduce risk to an organization's sensitive data. In fact, many Symantec DLP customers have reported a significant reduction in data security incidents after implementing user notifications. In this topic, we will provide a brief summary of the user notification options available in Symantec DLP. These options can be grouped into two categories: simple notifications, such as sending an email to a user who has violated policy, and notifications that are part of a combined response, such as a quarantine response rule that moves a sensitive file to a secure location and leaves an explanatory marker file in its place. Simple notifications, which we discuss in this lesson, are especially useful for the notification phase of the data loss risk reduction implementation model. Notifications that are part of block and quarantine responses are useful for extending data security awareness training into the prevention phase of the data loss risk reduction implementation model. For all incident types, you have the option of sending an email notification, and this will send an email with text that you specify to the user who caused the incident. For cloud storage incident types, you have the option of adding a visual tag, which enables incident responders to apply visual tags as metadata to sensitive content stored in Box Cloud Storage targets. This visual tag helps Box Cloud Storage users search for and self-remediate sensitive data. For instance, you might want the tag to read, "This content is considered confidential." You can also remind users of additional security features of Box, such as adding password protection to download links. For cloud storage, you also have the option of quarantining, which is leaving a marker text file in place of the quarantined file. The text you specify for the marker file will explain to the user why the original file was quarantined and where it can now be found. There is also an option for adding a visual tag. This quarantine file option, which leaves a marker text file in place of the quarantine file, can also apply to endpoint incident types. For endpoint incident types, you can also specify a block response, which will display an on-screen notification to the user when the movement of confidential data is blocked on the endpoint. Endpoint incidents can also display an on-screen notification to the endpoint user when an attempt is made to copy or send a sensitive file. You can provide a reason for the notification, as well as options for the endpoint user to provide a justification for their action. Additionally, you can add a user cancel option, which will display a time-sensitive notification to the user when a policy is violated. The user will have a limited amount of time to decide to ignore the policy violation or not. If the violation is ignored, the data transfer completes and an incident is created. If the violation is not ignored, the data transfer is stopped and an incident is still created. If the user does not make a decision in the allotted time, the data transfer is automatically blocked and an incident is created. You could provide a reason for the notification, as well as options for the endpoint user to provide a justification for their action. For network prevent incidents, you have the option to block SMTP messages, which will bounce blocked SMTP email messages to the sender, with an accompanying text that you want to appear in the SMTP error that network prevent email returns to the MTA. Some MTAs display this text in the message that is bounced to the sender. You can also configure network prevent to block HTTP and HTTPS. This will display a rejection message in the user's browser when content is blocked. Note that if the requesting client does not expect an HTML response, the rejection message may not be displayed in their client browser. For instance, a client expecting an XML response to a web post may only indicate a JavaScript error. Network prevent incidents also have the option of removing HTTP and HTTPS content. Two user notification options are provided. The removal message appears in web content from which the system has removed confidential information. Only the recipient will see this message. The rejection message is a message that network prevent returns to a client when it blocks an HTTP or HTTPS post. The client web application may or may not display the rejection message, depending on how the application handles error messages. For network protect incidents, you also have the option of doing a quarantine file action, where you leave a marker text file in place of the quarantine file. And as before, the text you specify for the marker file will explain to the user why the original file was quarantined and where it can now be found. Note that in these previous tables, the simple notifications that you can use to educate users prior to implementing block or quarantine actions are indicated by an asterisk. Note that the user cancel response, marked with a cross, is a hybrid notification option because it can be used as a simple notification, but also gives the user the option to cancel, that is, block the operation they were attempting. There are also two incident types entitled Cloud Applications and API Appliance, related to data in motion and data at rest. These incident types are applicable to the Cloud Detection Service integrated with Symantec CloudSock. The block data in motion response allows the system to display a block message in the user's browser whenever the user attempts to perform an action involving sensitive data in motion in a cloud application, as detected through the Cloud Detection Service or the API detection for Developer Apps Appliance. By contrast, the redact data in motion allows the system to display a message in the user's browser explaining why the sensitive data in motion they were working with in a cloud application was redacted. The quarantine data at rest response allows the system to leave a marker text file in place of a quarantined file on either Box, OneDrive, Salesforce, SharePoint, or Slack. The text you specify for the marker file will explain to the user why the original file was quarantined and where it can now be found. There are two methods for sending Symantec DLP notifications to users in response to incidents: automated response and smart response. Using an automated response method, notifications are automatically sent to users when they interact with data in a way that violates a DLP policy, to which a notification response rule is attached. All of Symantec DLP's notification options, as summarized in the previous section of this lesson, are available with automated response rules. Using a smart response method, an incident responder can manually cause a notification to be sent to a user as part of the incident remediation workflow. For instance, an incident responder might study the detailed information in an incident snapshot, then determine that the incident is severe, and then click a button to send a notification to the user who triggered the incident. Incident remediation workflow is discussed in depth in the following lesson called Remediating Data Loss Incidents and Tracking Risk Reduction. However, in this lesson, we will confine the discussion to configuring email notifications. These notifications can be used with any Symantec DLP detection server type, and they can be used both in automated responses attached to DLP policies and in smart responses as part of the incident remediation workflow. Note that since this lesson focuses on user education, which includes the use of simple notifications that are typically rolled out during the notification phase of the data loss risk reduction implementation model, we will only discuss the configuration of the simple send email notification options here. Other notification options, for instance notifications that are combined with blocking and quarantine actions, will be covered further in the lesson entitled Preventing Unauthorized Exposure of Confidential Data. The send email notification action sends an email to a user who has mishandled confidential data, causing Symantec DLP to detect an incident. You can fully customize the contents of the notification email, such as including variables containing incident attribute information and tailoring the body text of the email to educate the user on DLP policies and secure data handling practices. Some best practices to keep in mind as you configure and implement notifications are: 1. In the notification text include the name of the policy that has been violated, a link to a web page that explains your organization's data protection policies, and contact information for someone who can answer any questions users might have about the notification. Secondly, try to coordinate the deployment of notifications with your data security awareness training. If users have been trained and are expecting notifications, they will learn more quickly. This next section will provide an overview of how to configure the send email notification action in an automated response rule. First, in the Enforce Administration console, add a new automated response rule by going to Manage, Policies, Response Rules. Next, under the Conditions section, configure any response rule conditions as needed. From the Actions drop-down, select an action and click Add Action. In this case, we will select Send Email Notification. Next, configure any notification parameters. In this section, you can select variables that will automatically enter data fields into your notification. You can include the sender, the original data owner, and the original message that triggered the policy violation. When finished, push the Save button in the top left to save the response rule. This figure shows a completed and configured send email notification action. In summary, Symantec DLP notifications are a valuable method for educating users about secure data practices because they provide alerts of infractions immediately with an on-screen pop-up or via email message, text marker, and tag to educate the user about the incident and what to do next. There are two methods for sending Symantec DLP notifications to users in response to incidents. Automated responses automatically send notifications to users when they violate DLP policies. And smart responses enable incident responders to manually send notifications to users as part of the incident remediation workflow. The send email notification action sends an email to a user who has violated a DLP policy, and you can fully customize the contents of the notification email, such as including variables containing incident attribute information and tailoring the body text to the email to educate the user on DLP policies and secure data handling practices. In this lesson, we've talked about how data security awareness training helps organizations reduce risks to confidential data by increasing users' understanding of proper data security principles and practices. For data security awareness training to be effective, users need to feel committed to protecting data. Helping users clearly understand the impact that each individual's data handling practices can have on the health of their organization can help strengthen this commitment. For additional reference material, you can consult the Symantec Data Loss Prevention Administration Guide or some additional manuals from ISO and NIST as listed here, as well as the general knowledge base and help section of the support.symantec.com website. Thank you for joining us. This concludes the Educating Users to Adopt Data Protection Practices module of the Symantec Data Loss Prevention 15.5 Administration course.